No, we're not putting a shirt on for today. We're also not fixing our hair for today. Today, we're talking about one of the highlight specs doing well in the PTR when it comes to the DPS, and we are talking about the Marksmanship Hunter. Now, their situation is interesting because they have been nerfed back to back in the past couple of weeks. They have first received a sweeping set of nerfs to Dark Ranger, which nerfed their single target by about 8% or so and their AoE by about 15%, and then a few days later they got a blanket 10% nerf to all of their damage. That being said, they were still doing quite well in the PTR. It's also interesting that as a spec they are doing quite well in both of their hero talents. Now, while in the raid there is a way more clear dominance of Dark Ranger, in Mythic Plus Sentinel is the better option, but Dark Ranger is still not a completely dead in the water kind of talent, is still doing quite well. So what is the situation compared to the live version of Hunter, starting from Mythic Plus, where they play Dark Ranger? Now, when you see and look at their talents, you might think that a lot is changing just by looking at how many things are moving around in the talent tree. Well, the reality is that most of this is actually just talents moving around. For example, you see here lock and load and trick shots and in the rhythm, and then you move in 11.2, and then lock and load has swapped places with trick shots and in the rhythm is slightly wider out. Or you see things like bullseye and small game hunter all the way to the right. In live, you move to 11.2 and now they are here. There isn't actually any particular major change in your talent tree besides the talents themselves moving around, except for Unerring Vision, which is the biggest change of your talent tree coming into the next patch. The biggest change is the fact that now Unerring Vision is no longer a choice node with double tap, but it has become a choice node with calling the shots. So now you get, I guess, to take double tap most of the time, but now you have to choose whether or not you want a stronger Trueshot on a 2-minute cooldown or no buffs for Trueshot, but Trueshot on a 90-second cooldown. Now this is pretty much always going to be your reduced cooldown pick for Sentinel, because Sentinel doesn't have the help that Dark Ranger has when it comes to your new tier sets. The tier set of the Dark Ranger, which flat out reduces the cooldown of Trueshot by 30 seconds. So Dark Ranger can basically go and cheat and still go for Unerring Vision because they get the 30-second CDR from their tier set, but Sentinel does not. A lot of the new power of this Marksmanship Hunter in Mythic Plus comes from their tier set, almost exclusively from their tier set, because as we mentioned, not much is changing in terms of talents, right? We just looked at not really anything major changing, except though now your tier set is massive. So the 2-piece and the 4-piece, the damage increase is whatever. The rapid fire doing 25% more damage and Sentinel doing 25% more damage, you know, these two buffed by 25%, it's like a 4% damage increase. We're not talking about anything that relevant. What is much more relevant is when Lunar Storm ends, you gain Boon of Elune, which will cause your next 2 aim shots to deal arcane damage and also deal 30% more damage. Now, the Sentinel final point, Lunar Storm, will proc every 30 seconds. All the time. Every time you rapid fire, every 30 seconds, you get the cooldown to reset, and then the next one, the next rapid fire will put you into Lunar Storm for 12 seconds. This is happening every time, every 30 seconds. So you have, of course, the empowered window of Lunar Storm, and then after this you get 2 empowered aim shots. This is relevant because, for example, dealing arcane damage is good because it means it doesn't do physical damage. Physical damage is reduced by armor, is reduced by the base armor level of enemies. Usually turning physical into magical means that your attack does roughly 30% more damage. So basically this reads as you do 30% more damage with aim shots, and then you do 30% more damage again when you get this empowerment. What makes this super good, especially in Mythic Plus, is the fact that now the Boon of Elune, so these 2 empowered aim shots, is now active for the entire duration of Lunar Storm at full effectiveness. This means very simply that every 30 seconds, every time you reset rapid fire and then cast rapid fire and proc Lunar Storm, for 12 seconds you will have a significantly empowered aim shot. And then even once those 12 seconds end, you will still have 2 more empowered aim shots because of your 2-piece giving you your 2 next empowered aim shots after Lunar Storm. This creates a pretty obvious situation when you look at the buffs of the Hunter throughout the entire Mythic Plus run, where you look at, for example, Lunar Storm being active for about almost 35% of the time, right? Then you look at the tier buff, which is Boon of Elune, which is also active for 35% of the time, because obviously it's active when Lunar Storm becomes active. And then you have a second Boon of Elune active. This is the one that activates once Boon of Elune, which empowers your next 2 aim shots. We can zoom to make it, you know, more obvious. You can see that the Boon of Elune and Lunar Storm are the same, and then right when they end, the second Boon of Elune happens, right? And this makes for some pretty good numbers there, even if we don't go for the first, you know, major pulls in Mythic Plus. You can see that within the Lunar Storm itself and the buff with Boon of Elune, you can land some major aim shots, all empowered by your tier set. And this is, as mentioned, extremely good because, as you can see, it's not that this is a major cooldown. This is only repeating every 30 seconds on a very fixed interval. It happens by itself every time you rapid fires, right? So it's very, very consistent, which is very good in Mythic Plus because every 30 seconds you pretty much always have some kind of Mythic Plus packs to be fighting, right? So it does create a very good loop around this Lunar Storm window, which, as mentioned, will be up very often, because if every 30 seconds you have a 12-second power window, and then a few seconds after, because your next 2 aim shots, once that 12 seconds window is over, are still going to be empowered, basically for 15 seconds every 30 you will have this empowered window, which is a third of the time. A third of your entire combat time you will have this buff. And we saw from the buffs of the Hunter that in fact Lunar Storm was active basically a third of your fighting time. So this tier set being active so often and giving you such a good powerful window on a very steady level, basically every 30 seconds, is very good in Mythic Plus. It does give you very good consistent damage in Mythic Plus with your talent setup basically not changing. You basically just have the taking of double tap and taking of calling the shots, forgetting an arrowing vision when you're in Mythic Plus. The rest is basically the same as you are currently playing in live as a Marksmanship Hunter. Most of your damage is coming from or rather most of the new thing in 11.2 will be the extra power in your Lunar Storm window given to you by your tier set when playing Sentinel. Now, obviously, we are still talking about Marksmanship Hunter, so at the end of the day, you don't have that many buttons you are pressing, as a spec is still very simple and very straightforward. It does have very front-loaded damage and lacks a little bit in cooldowns, in the sense that Trueshot itself is your basically one and only cooldown you have, and that's about it. The rest is just going to be, as mentioned, these 30-second cycles of Lunar Storm happening very, very often. You're basically almost a Beast Mastery level kind of spec in how often you get your cooldown. Basically now you can treat these windows as like Bestial Wrath of BM. That's how often you get your power spikes as a Marksmanship Hunter in Mythic Plus. The damage is very high. You do have also some level of priority damage, which is very valuable in Mythic Plus. We have seen some specs, rise to becoming very valuable, like Arcane Mage, because of the prior damage they could do. Now, obviously, aim shot is ricocheting a bunch of times when you have trick shots, right? However, trick shots still ricochets for 75% of the damage across the other 5 enemies. Your main target takes full damage from your aim shot. So you are a spec doing AoE, but your primary target of rapid fire and your primary target of aim shot will still be taking more damage than the rest of the AoE you will be doing, right? So you do have at least some prio damage in your aim shot and in your rapid fire. Everything else just does blanket AoE, you know, explosive shot, multi-shot, sentinel, lunar storm, volley. These are all just a very wide AoE buttons, except for your aim shot and rapid fire, which can do slightly more damage on your primary target. Overall, it's a very highly right now regarded spec in Mythic class because of their damage, because of their very consistent AoE damage and their very consistent burst 30-second windows of Lunar Storm, thanks to the power of the tier set for AoE. For Mythic class is pretty high up in terms of power level right now, despite back-to-back nerfs to the spec. Now, talking about the back-to-back nerfs to the spec, technically speaking, Sentinel suffered much less because one fully dedicated nerf was to Dark Ranger and to the power also of their damage across the hero talent itself, much less about the marksmanship toolkit and more so about the damage of Dark Ranger itself. Despite this though, marksmanship is still doing quite well, as Dark Ranger, primarily of course for the raid, for single target. This is more focused at, even though as we mentioned, Dark Ranger is not nearly as much of a dead spec when talking about Mythic Plus. Now in terms of tier set, Dark Rangers is much simpler. You get more damage of Black Arrow, you get more damage on Bleak Powder for the AoE version, basically the explosion, and then you get the 30% cooldown on Trueshot. The 4-piece is also very simple, it's entirely dedicated to the burst window of your Trueshot. When you activate Trueshot, you get Withering Fire, the extra effect. So Withering Fire buffs your Black Arrow's damage by 50%. When you consume Death Blow inside of this window, you have a 50% chance to cause Black Arrow barrages during your Withering Fire to fire one additional Black Arrow. So it's still within this power window of Withering Fire's cooldown with Trueshot. Now, despite what the tier set might even make you think about, which is focused on activating Trueshot, still going for the CDR version of Trueshot isn't even being picked the most by hunters right now, because you would think, okay, we have a freebie 30-second CDR of Trueshot here. So if we take calling the shots and we get a further 30-second CDR, we would put Trueshot at a 1-minute cooldown between the tier set and our talent. So every minute we have 15 seconds of Trueshot. Not just that, but since we play with tensile bowstring, we can extend Trueshot up to 20 seconds. So every 60 seconds we have 20 seconds of Trueshot. Most of the time, hunters are still playing with Unerring Vision anyways. Now, when it comes to Dark Ranger, there is one, possible confusion, possible perhaps annoyance we can say about the spec. So, we mentioned marksmanship being simple in Mythic Plus and in AoE. It of course becomes even simpler when it comes to single target. You are dropping things like explosive shot, you are dropping things like multi-shot, right? You have even fewer things to press. Some hunters have been a bit disgruntled on the RNG-ness power of Black Arrow. So Black Arrow is essentially your kill shot, right? For the unawares, kill shot turns into Black Arrow when you play Dark Ranger. However, there is a compounding set of elements of RNG to this kill shot now transformed into Dark Ranger. For starters, you already have a flat 10% chance of your aim shots to proc Death Blow, which is you can use your Black Arrow whenever to whichever target regardless of their HP. Basically the warrior's sudden death for their execute, right? Then you can buff this number up to 15% for aim shot. You can also add a 25% chance for your rapid fire to give you Death Blow. On top of this, you now have your auto attacks having an 8% chance to grant you Death Blow. On top of this, you are playing with on target to give you more stuck in haste up to 20% to make you auto attack faster. You're also playing with in the rhythm to give you faster auto attacks, so you can attack even faster to have even more chances to proc your Death Blow. And on top of this, when you actually cast Black Arrow, you also have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of Black Arrow. And you can then cast Black Arrow again and also have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of Black Arrow. So what this means is basically the legal amount of times you are casting Black Arrow in a fight, where you would expect this to happen, right, in execute phase, are these. All of these are caused essentially by RNG, are caused by resets. For example, this window compared to this window, or this window compared to this window. This is completely outside of your control. You're not choosing any of this. You are, of course, more in control of your procs when you are inside of your, basically your Trueshot, because you do get death blow when you enter your Trueshot window, so you can use your kill shot in there, but outside of these windows, which are pretty visible in here when you're using it, it's just RNG. So it does annoy hunters a bit. What is also annoying is that you are a casting spec, right? Your aim shot is channeled, your steady shot is channeled, your rapid fire is channeled, right? If you look at basically the casts, is it channeled, is it channeled, is it channeled? And to make it worse, this has a chance to reset Black Arrow, this has a chance to reset Black Arrow as well, and usually in between your steady shots, you're gonna have auto attacks, which have a chance to proc the reset of Black Arrow, and as you are finishing a steady shot cast, or a rapid fire cast, or an aim shot cast, you have already prepped up another cast, right? Like, for example, when the steady shot cast time is ending, you have already primed an aim shot. But what happens if, as steady shot ends and you land an auto attack and you start channeling aim shot, you proc death blow and Black Arrow resets? Now you are on your way to casting your aim shot, missing out on 1 GCD of the reset of Black Arrow, or maybe you're doing the same with rapid fire. It's annoying because it's a very uncontrollable set of RNG elements, right? It is seen as annoying because you really have no control. You have basically too many things with a small chance of proccing the reset. You have aim shot, you have rapid fire, you have your own auto attacks, all with a chance of resetting Black Arrow, which becomes, you know, a bit annoying when you consider how much damage your Black Arrow and all of the associated buffs and damage increases following Black Arrow are doing, right? That's kind of the slight annoyance around the current, I guess, version of Dark Ranger. Now, much like BM, it's not that too many things have changed in your talent compared to live. Yes, there are a bunch of things moving around, but as we mentioned, it's mostly the placements and less so about the actual talents you're picking. You have, you know, a few flex points because of double tap, right? Now that you weren't planning on taking double tap in live, now that you are forced to basically pick one of these two, you have 1 free point tier. You could get rid of this point and look for others, like these ones right here are all in contention for being taken. But at the moment, even if slightly, double tap is still pulling ahead anyways in terms of damage, so you might as well keep it at the moment when it comes to your raid single target version of the spec. You were doing, let's just call it as it is, very OP, you know, S tier numbers before your most recent 10% nerf in all damage for the spec. Now it's you know, A tier. It's good, valuable level damage for a marksmanship. If anything, ironically, the most the highest danger you have for your spec in playing Dark Ranger in the raid will be the power of BM, of Beast Mastery in the raid. You might want to, or have to, if you are very competitive, respec to BM, very simple because pack leader is like 4 or 3% damage ahead of Dark Ranger in single target, so you might just have to play BM for that reason. But otherwise, it's not because you are both doing terribly, it's because you're both doing well. Now, you still go for crit mastery when it comes to marksmanship in Mythic Plus. You have a much higher value of your haste in the raid, mostly because of the value of Dark Ranger and the value of faster casting, faster auto-attacking, because all of this means more chances to proc death blow, and more chances to proc death blow means more chances to do basically half of your damage. So you have way more value in casting faster when it comes to single target because of Black Arrow, whereas when you are in Mythic Plus, it's not nearly as valuable. You have had some questions about trinkets, because of course, what happens if the best way to play Dark Ranger, for example, is to use the 30-second CDR of the tier? plus the 30-second CDR of your talent, making this a 1-minute cooldown. Could the play be to play with double 2-minute cooldown trinkets? So on pull, you use one of those trinkets, and then 1 minute later, when Trueshot is back, you use your second 2-minute cooldown trinket. And then at 2 minutes in, you use the trinket you used on pull, right? You cycle the 2-minute trinkets. Over keeping this on a 90-second cooldown and simply using a 90-second cooldown trinket, right? At the moment, the usage of 90-second cooldown trinket is paying off better than the double 2-minute on-use cooldown with a shorter cooldown on Trueshot. To be fair, right now, the Ritual Forge 2-minute cooldown trinket seems to be the best one in the new season. You would have to go for Lily of the Eternal Weave trinket, which is the basically only proper 90-second cooldown trinket you can find, which is the main stat plus 90-second mastery on use trinket, which luckily enough for non-raiders this is a Mythic Plus trinket. You can go and farm Ecodom Aldani to get this trinket. So even for the non-raiders it will be the best option for your trinket if you're playing the 90-second cooldown Trueshot, which would be the way to play actually, even if you're playing in Mythic Plus. When you're playing Sentinel, you are having a normal 90-second cooldown Trueshot, so if you want to line this up with a trinket, this will be the trinket to go for, as opposed to the 2-minute cooldown trinket in the raid, which will also have a much bigger competition, because it's going to be hunted by basically every 2-minute cooldown DPS spec, pretty much. Now, one more word about the two specs. As mentioned, even in Mythic Plus, Hunter, even playing still Black Arrow, is, as mentioned, very competitive. Dark Ranger is not one of those cases where you see some of these specs where you have one hero talent with 100% usage, right, in Mythic Plus. Like, for example, if we switch to balance, you have 94% in Mythic Plus for Luna's Chosen and 99% in the raid for Keeper of the Grove, right? For marksmanship right now, Dark Ranger is still doing pretty well in Mythic Plus. Many of the talent change in your Dark Ranger compared to live. You can see quite a few of them have moved around and been added, especially some of the very good QOLs like Umbral Reach. Now, if Bleak Powder damages 2 or more enemies, you gain trick shots. So you get a way to bypass one pretty weak GCD, which is multi-shot, which you need to cast to gain trick shots in AoE, for example. Now you get it basically for free when you cast Black Arrow. It's a very good QOL tool for Dark Ranger in Mythic Plus. It is a pretty good tool in terms of value, considering, you know, multi-shot, it's doing, you know, pitiful damage. You don't really want to spend too much time using this, right? So overall, right now, marksmanship is doing very well as a spec. It's on the verge on S tier. The only reason why it's not fully is because of the multiple back-to-back nerfs it has received, and on an even more positive note, it is for both of its hero talent. It's not that one hero talent is completely dead and you have to put all of your eggs in a single basket hoping that Blizzard doesn't nerf it. Yes, Sentinel is much more valuable in Mythic Plus and has less power in the raid and in single target, but for Dark Ranger, the power is pretty powerful in both. Single target, raid-wise in particular, but also in Mythic Plus it is doing quite well. We have mentioned after the general talent tree rework, you have gotten significantly tankier. The memes of hunters being very squishy and very difficult to keep up is kind of gone now. They are definitely a solidly tanky spec overall. Their damage is solid. Yes, there are definitely still some grunts and pouts about having some kind of soft locking in your target cap in AoE for marksmanship, but at the very moment the numbers are still doing quite well in Mythic Plus. So this was the recap of how the spec has been doing so far in the PTR and what has changed for marksmanship so far in the PTR for next season, and more importantly why it has been doing well in the testing for both the raid and Mythic Plus in both of the hero talents. So for today, on this Friday, this was our spec in focus. So for today, On the eve, at the beginning of this weekend, we can now leave each other. We're starting as usual with the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I don't know, you know, sometimes you just wake up, you don't really want to put your shirt on because it just doesn't feel right. It's just too hot, you know?